Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Easy Does It. Here we take a deeper dive into some of the staple concentrates available and what you should have in your flavor stash. And for today's show, we decided to talk about TFA Marshmallow. And initially, what we always talk about is what the in-recipe median is. I looked on all the flavors. It's 1.58%. I kind of agree with that one. You know, for once, I kind of agree. Between 1 and 2% is where you can use it. Some of the history on this, I mean, you know, when I started mixing, the problem was that the TFA sweetener would gunk up your coils. And, you know, at that point in time, I wasn't building. And the RTAs that you could buy, and when I started building, you know, the coils weren't as big as what they are now, and you could gunk up your coils extremely quickly. So using sweetener, you had to use it very sparingly, you know, otherwise you would gunk up your coils extremely quickly, especially the RTAs that I was using. I'm not talking about the RDAs because I wasn't really interested in RDAs when I started mixing up. But what Marshmallow did for me back then, you know, now when I started mixing, what I really wanted, one of the very first profiles that I absolutely wanted to nail, and I think a lot of people want this, is just a nice creamy milkshake, you know. And, you know, a milkshake itself has some sweetness to it. And TFA Marshmallow was an extremely important ingredient for me because it added that sweetness and that fluffiness, you know, almost like a whipped fluffiness to a milkshake. And when I discovered that, it literally went into all my milkshake mixes at the time. I couldn't get enough of it. I had a milkshake base, and I would just use that milkshake base and just add, you know, fruits on top of that milkshake base to go from like a lemon or a strawberry to a blueberry or whatever the case is. And that's what I vaped for almost a year. You know, I just used my established milkshake base with some TFA Marshmallow in it that had some sweetness and fluffiness to it. And yeah, that's what I used it for. And you guys?
I basically used it as an additive, specifically on the sugar profile. I also don't like to use too much super sweet or sweetener because of the gunky coil thing. So I combined it with super sweet to give me more sweetness, but also in a fuller way. That fluffiness that you described, it's basically the best description I can use myself. So with my fruit mixes, I generally kept it between 0.3 to 0.7, but I do agree with the 1 to 1.5 ratio, depending on what you're using. So for additives, I would say 0.5% is a good start. But if you want to bring more of that marshmallowy profile into a mix as a feature, or to use it to build on, or to broaden another flavor, I would also use the higher percentages. So my experience isn't really much in marshmallow as a profile. I used it as a sweetener, or to boost the sweetener in a more textured sugar way, without really giving it sugar. To explain it, if I would have had only the super sweet in there, you would get, typically I can explain it as a very sugary milk, like that in cereal. If you ate spoons full of sugar, like I had 9 spoons of sugar, and then my cereal sprinkled over that, what was left was a very sweet milk. So only sweetener gives me that very sweet milk covering your mouth, where if I add a little bit or combine it with a little bit of TFA marshmallow, it gives me that sweetness that doesn't stick to the inside of your face hole. So it's additives in my side. I really like it. It boosts the sweetness in a texture way, and kind of tones it down in the same way. It brings the overbearing part of a sweetener back down. A lot of people don't like the high sweetener because of that, exactly as I explained. Like if it's similar to how I experience my sweetness.
Yeah, marshmallow for me, it was an absolute go-to and an essential flavor to get in the period when I started mixing, which was around 2016. Tons of recipes were using it. It was the go-to sweetener. It was the go-to mouthfeel additive. And since then, it's kind of dropped out of favor a lot. And part of the reason for that is that most marshmallow flavors are heavy in maltol. So you're going to get a fair amount of muting from it. And the higher you go, the more that muting is going to be. The other reason is that even though it adds sweetness, there are other ways to add sweetness. Pear, Fuji, various other fruits, and things like milk and honey and so on will add sweetness, but not without that heavy muting that marshmallow brings to the table. So it was very much like meringue in the early days. It was used as an additive where you're not looking for a discernible marshmallow taste. It was laid in lightly underneath the other ingredient, under the other ingredients, just to add that little bit of sweetening, that little bit of mouthfeel, that little bit of rounding that maltol brings. It knocks the edges of citrus and so on. But since then, there are other ways to do that. Where you are actually looking for a marshmallow flavor in a recipe, and there are people who've done that. I mean, Marshmallow Man was a very popular juice for a long time. Coke did a recipe where marshmallow was the top note. So there, obviously, it has its uses, and it will be used, again, with the caveat that it's probably going to mute a lot of things around it. But I think that has now become the more accepted use of marshmallow, that it's some people still use it as an accent for the reasons that it was used way back when, but it has kind of fallen out of favor now. So I think people would probably only turn to it where they actually want that discernible marshmallow flavor on it. The problem is that you can't make a lot of the older recipes unless you have at least TFA marshmallow, preferably FA as well, and ideally cap on top of that. There have been other marshmallows that have become fairly popular in the interim. Vanilla marshmallows become quite popular. Apparently, the Loran's is good, but I think for the purposes of making other people's recipe, I would go in the order TFA, FA, cap. I think once you've got those three, you've pretty much nailed the entire market. So it's still a good flavor to have in your stash. Just understand that you won't be using it, or you won't be seeing it as much in recipes as people were seeing it a year or 2 years ago. It has fallen out of favor a bit, but still a handy flavor to have. Just as Deet says, go easy on the percentages. Don't bombard your juice with it unless you're looking for a prominent marshmallow flavor and you're willing to live with a bit of muting, or you actually want to force a bit of muting, which is also a valid use of it. So yeah, handy flavor, but probably not as handy as it once was.
I just want to go back to a point you mentioned. You said there's other ways to get that sweetness and that mouthfeel, and you mentioned specifically meringue. It's very interesting because it's something I wanted to mention but left out because I felt that there will be many who will disagree with me on this. But I also use meringue in an additive way for the mouthfeel, the sugary, foamy, sugary mouthfeel type that comes with meringue in a sweetener type of way. The problem for me with meringue is at the percentages, I like it to add that mouthfeel or that additive profile that I'm trying to get in my recipes. The meringue brings in that egginess, and I don't like that egginess. Eggs and fruit does not mix. So it's not that raw. You know exactly that egginess from a meringue.
Blech.
So what I did was, where there's meringue in some of my older recipes that I reviewed and amended,
Mm.
I changed the meringue out for marshmallow, specifically for that mouthfeel, and it works for me because there's not that eggy feeling. So for an additive way, also if you want to maybe not, I won't say sub meringue, but if you have a recipe with meringue in it and the egginess of the meringue is not doing to the profile in a mouthfeel that you are aiming for, I would recommend try marshmallow to give you that mouthfeel or that sweet profile that you're trying from the meringue.
Yeah, I think it's good to get this also, if you starting to develop recipes and, it's more on the creamy side and, you want a fluffiness to your cream, but you still want a full vape experience. I think TFA Marshmallow is definitely a nice place to kind of start out with. It really blends well with TFA vanilla bean ice cream. So if you mix that at like 3 or 4% plus 1% TFA Marshmallow, you have a pretty good base ready for like a milkshake kind of base. I mean, this is really basic stuff from back in the day, but a lot of people aren't really interested in all the new stuff that is out and trending right now. They just want a solid ice cream base, and you can get that with TFA vanilla bean ice cream if you don't get the pepper in it, and add a little bit of TFA marshmallow to it. So yeah, I think this deserves to be in your flavor stash. I stand by it.
I agree.
You're going to find a lot of recipes. I mean, even on ATF, you're going to find 6,711 recipes that contains this. So that's reason enough to get it as part of your flavor stash.
Yep.
Yeah, guys, if there's any questions on TFA Marshmallow, or there's a way in which this is being used that we didn't really talk about, please leave this in the comments below. Or if there's a recipe that that uses this, that you want other people to try, leave it in the comments below as well. But yeah, thank you so much for watching the show, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.